He had billions, power, and everything money could buy, but he still felt empty. So one night, this billionaire made a shocking decision. He would throw it all away, disguise himself as a poor cripple, and test the kindness of strangers. What he discovered from a simple delivery girl would change his life forever. The city skyline stretched like a crown of lights across the evening horizon, its skyscrapers gleaming in gold reflections of the dying sun. In the tallest of them all, a glass-walled penthouse looked down on the bustling world beneath, a kingdom that belonged to one man, David Cole. David was the kind of billionaire whose face often appeared on business magazines. He was tall, sharply dressed, and his gray eyes carried an intensity that unsettled even seasoned negotiators. People called him ruthless, brilliant, and untouchable. But behind the cold mask of success, David harbored a secret torment. In his private study, he sat slouched on a leather chair, swirling a glass of wine but not tasting it. He stared at the city below, his thoughts heavy. How do I ever know who truly cares for me? Another one, sir? Asked his assistant, Marcus, a loyal man in his 50s who had served him for more than a decade. David shook his head. No, Marcus. No more wine. I'm not thirsty. I'm tired. His voice was low, burdened. Marcus studied him carefully. Is this about Miss Valeria? David chuckled bitterly. Valeria, his most recent relationship, had ended in scandal. The moment she realized his trust fund had been temporarily frozen for a legal inquiry, she vanished like smoke. Not even a goodbye. Weeks later, she was photographed with another wealthy businessman. She loved my money, Marcus, David said, placing the glass down hard. Not me. Not once. Most of them do, Marcus replied cautiously. Then how do I find someone who doesn't? David stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room. His movements were restless, his gaze burning. I want to know if kindness still exists in its pure form. If compassion can survive without expecting anything in return. Marcus frowned. And how do you plan to test that, sir? David stopped, a strange glint of inspiration flickering in his eyes. He walked over to a corner of the study where an unused wheelchair sat, a leftover from a charity event for disabled veterans. He ran his fingers along its handle slowly. What if I became invisible? David whispered, more to himself than Marcus. What if I stripped everything away, the wealth, the power, the name, and became just a man in need? Would anyone still show me kindness? Marcus's eyes widened slightly. You're thinking of pretending? Yes, David said firmly, the decision solidifying in his mind. A poor cripple. A nobody. And I'll see how the world treats me. If there's still goodness left in people. Marcus hesitated. Sir, this is dangerous. You could be taken advantage of. Or worse. David smirked, though there was no humor in it. That's the risk I'm willing to take. I'd rather face the truth in disguise than live forever surrounded by lies and wealth. The city lights blinked in the distance as if watching. In that moment, the billionaire's plan was born. A dangerous masquerade that would change not only his life, but also the life of someone he had yet to meet. The next morning, David stood in front of the tall mirror in his penthouse dressing room. Normally, this was where he prepared for business battles, adjusting tailored suits worth thousands of dollars and polishing his appearance before stepping into boardrooms or gala events. But today was different. Today the goal was not to stand out but to disappear. On the marble counter lay the disguise Marcus had carefully gathered. A pair of worn-out jeans with frayed edges, a faded hoodie with a loose hem, and sneakers so scuffed they looked as if they had walked across 100 miles of hardship. These were not clothes that commanded respect. They were the kind that made people pass by without a second glance. David picked up the hoodie, running his fingers over the thin fabric. So this is what it feels like to be invisible, he muttered. Marcus stood at the door, arms folded, watching with a mixture of doubt and worry. Sir, I must say this is unnecessary. You don't need to go this far. You're walking into a world you've never lived in. David slipped into the jeans and hoodie, his expensive watch and jewelry already left behind in a drawer. He looked almost unrecognizable now, the sharp aura of a billionaire buried under the weight of mediocrity. That's exactly the point, Marcus, he said quietly. If I don't strip away everything, how will I ever know who sees me? Not my wealth, not my power, but me? The wheelchair stood waiting in the corner. It wasn't new or polished, but a used chair Marcus had obtained through one of their charity partners. Its steel frame bore scratches, the leather seat was cracked, and one of the wheels squeaked faintly when pushed. David placed his hands on the handles and let them rest there for a moment. This is the heart of the disguise, he whispered. A crippled man, poor and struggling. That's who they'll see. He lowered himself carefully into the chair. Marcus moved to assist him, but David waved him off. He strapped one leg stiffly to make it appear immobile and slumped his posture until his body looked small, weak, and vulnerable. He pushed the wheels experimentally, fumbling at first, the motion awkward and jerky. Even Marcus winced at how convincing it looked. For the final step, David needed a new home. The penthouse, with its marble floors and city views, would betray the illusion. Instead, Marcus had rented a one-room apartment in a rundown neighborhood far from the glittering skyline. When they arrived, David wheeled himself inside. The building was worn, its corridors narrow and dimly lit. Paint peeled from the walls and the smell of dampness lingered in the air. Inside, the apartment was no better. A single bed with a sagging mattress, a rickety wooden table, and an old refrigerator that growled when opened. David looked around, strangely calm. This will do. He placed his wallet on the table and counted out only a small amount of cash, just enough for simple meals. The rest of his wealth was left untouched, hidden from view. For the first time in years, David felt stripped bare. No assistants, no chefs, no luxury. Just a man in a wheelchair in a forgotten corner of the city. He stared at the empty fridge for a long moment, then picked up his phone. "Let's see what kindness looks like in the real world," he murmured. With steady fingers, he opened a food delivery app and placed his first order. The test had begun. The late afternoon sun had begun to sink, painting the cracked walls of the old apartment building in shades of amber. Inside his bare room, David waited quietly in his wheelchair, the silence pressing in around him. The only sound was the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak of pipes in the wall. He had placed his first food order earlier that day, and now he was about to meet the first person in his experiment. A soft knock echoed at the door. David's heart skipped. He hadn't felt this kind of anticipation in years, not even during billion-dollar deals. He wheeled himself closer, making sure to fumble slightly so his movements looked strained. Then with a deep breath he called, "Come in, it's open." The door pushed open slowly, and in stepped a young woman wearing a faded delivery uniform. Her black hair was tied back neatly, though strands of it escaped to frame her face. She carried a food bag in one hand and a receipt pad in the other. Her sneakers were worn thin, and her eyes had the faint shadow of someone who worked long hours yet kept moving forward. "Good evening, sir," she greeted, her voice polite but warm. "Food delivery for Mr. Cole?" David almost flinched at the sound of his own name. He had used it without thinking. Quickly he nodded. "Yes, that's me. Thank you." She stepped inside, setting the bag carefully on the rickety table. As she did, her eyes flicked toward him in the wheelchair. For a brief moment, David expected the usual reaction: pity, awkwardness, or impatience. Instead, he saw only curiosity followed by a gentle smile. "That's everything you ordered," she said, arranging the containers neatly. "Would you like me to help set it up so it's easier for you to reach?" David hesitated. This wasn't part of the act, but he nodded anyway. "If you don't mind." "Not at all." She moved quickly, placing utensils and opening lids with quiet efficiency. It was clear she had done this for others before. When David reached for his pocket to pull out some crumpled bills, he pretended to fumble. The money slipped from his fingers, scattering onto the floor. He muttered under his breath and leaned awkwardly from the chair, making the scene look clumsy. Without hesitation, the girl bent down and picked up the bills, dusting them lightly before placing them in his hand. "Here you go," she said softly, as if she didn't want him to feel embarrassed. David handed over the payment, but deliberately kept a small portion short. I think I miscalculated," he said, feigning worry. "I don't have the full amount. I'm sorry." The girl paused, glancing at the receipt, then back at him. For a second, David braced himself for anger or impatience. Instead, she smiled again, a smile so genuine it disarmed him. "It's all right," she said kindly. "Don't worry about it. I'll cover the rest. You need the meal more than I need the change." David blinked, stunned by her response. No hesitation, no irritation, just quiet generosity. She gathered her things and stepped back toward the door. "Enjoy your food, sir. Take care of yourself." And with that, she left, closing the door gently behind her. David sat frozen, staring at the table of food she had arranged. His chest tightened in a way he hadn't expected. The first test had begun, and already he was shaken. The room was quiet after the delivery girl left, but David's mind wasn't. He replayed her words again and again, "You need the meal more than I need the change." For years he had watched people scramble for his money, bend over backwards to impress him, and fight for scraps of his attention, all for what he could give them financially. But this girl, this stranger who looked like she barely had enough for herself, had willingly let go of a portion of her pay just so he could eat. The next evening he placed another order. He wanted to see if her kindness had been a one-time gesture or something deeper. As fate would have it, the same girl arrived again. This time, David wheeled himself deliberately closer to the door. When she entered, she greeted him with the same warmth, setting the bag on the table with practiced care. "You're ordering from us again?" she said cheerfully. "I hope that means the food was good yesterday." David smiled faintly, though inside he was measuring her every word. "Yes, it was better than I expected." She laughed softly. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment." As she unpacked the meal, David put his hand on the table, trembling slightly to sell the act. He sighed heavily. "The truth is, I don't get many visitors. Most days it's just me in these four walls." The girl paused, looking at him with genuine concern. "That must be hard. Do you have any family nearby?" He shook his head. "No, not anymore." There was a silence, the kind that usually made people uncomfortable. But instead of retreating, she leaned a little closer. "Well, at least you're not invisible. I see you. And I'm sure others do too, even if it doesn't always feel that way." The word struck David harder than he expected. He lowered his gaze quickly, afraid she would see something in his eyes that betrayed the truth. Then came the moment of the test. He reached into his pocket again, pulling out a smaller amount of money than required. This time, he hesitated more visibly, frowning at the bills in his palm. I'm short again. I didn't realize the prices had gone up." Her reaction was immediate. She waved it off, shaking her head. "Please don't worry about it. You don't owe me anything extra." "But—" "No buts," she said firmly, though her tone remained kind. "Food is a need, not a luxury. You shouldn't have to skip a meal over a few bills. I'll sort it out." She smiled, and once again her eyes carried no judgment, no irritation, just quiet compassion. As she left, David sat back in his wheelchair, stunned. Twice now she had chosen kindness over profit. Twice she had treated him as more than a transaction. He whispered to himself, "Who are you?" For the first time in years, the billionaire felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. 2 days later, David found himself waiting by the window like a child expecting a friend. He had ordered again, partly because he needed to keep the test going, but mostly because he wanted to see her, the delivery girl whose compassion had left him unsettled. The knock came earlier than expected. David wheeled himself over, forcing his movements to stay clumsy, and called out, "It's open." She stepped inside with her usual smile, carrying the food bag. "Here we are again," she said lightly. "At this rate I should just put you on a subscription." David chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Perhaps you should." As she placed the containers on the table, her eyes swept across the small apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the empty shelves, and most of all, the refrigerator standing slightly ajar, its dim interior light showing more emptiness than food. Her brow furrowed. "Do you have anything else to eat?" she asked carefully. David followed her gaze, hesitating. He had purposely left the fridge bare to strengthen the illusion, but he hadn't expected her to notice. "Not much," he admitted. "Sometimes just bread or instant noodles. It's hard getting around." Her expression softened and she let out a quiet sigh. Without another word, she reached into the side pocket of her delivery bag and pulled out a small container. "This was supposed to be my dinner later," she said, setting it on the table. "It's just rice and stew, nothing fancy. But I think you need it more than I do." David froze. Of all the scenarios he had imagined, anger, pity, indifference, he had never pictured this. A young woman who clearly didn't have much herself was giving away her own meal. "You shouldn't," he began, his voice breaking slightly. She cut him off gently. "Please. I insist. My little brother always says food tastes better when it's shared. And besides, I can grab something on the way home. Don't worry about me." David's throat tightened. He stared at her, trying to read her face, searching for hidden motives. But there was nothing there except sincerity. As she arranged both the delivery meal and her own food neatly before him, she moved with such natural care that it almost felt as though she had done this 100 times. When she was done, she stepped back and smiled. "There you go. Now you won't go hungry tonight." For a long moment, David couldn't find his words. He had built empires, crushed competitors, and commanded respect from powerful men, but he had never felt so humbled. When she finally left, the room seemed brighter, though the same flickering bulb hung overhead. David sat in silence, staring at the 2 meals in front of him. His hands trembled slightly as he whispered to himself, "Why would someone who has so little give so much? The mask of a crippled man had revealed something his billions never could, the pure heart of a stranger. The following evening, David placed yet another order. By now, the routine had become familiar, the quiet wait, the soft knock, and the girl's gentle smile filling the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. But tonight felt different. He wasn't just curious, he wanted to understand her. When she arrived, she carried not only the food bag but also a small thermos tucked under her arm. "This one's on me," she said as she unpacked the meal. "Homemade ginger tea. Helps with the cold evenings." David raised his brows, caught off guard. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she replied simply. She set the thermos on the table, then glanced at him as he awkwardly tried to adjust the food containers. "Here, let me help," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting across from him. It was the first time she had done that. David studied her quietly. She looked tired, the faint shadows under her eyes told of long shifts and heavy burdens. Yet her smile never wavered. "You work long hours, don't you?" he asked carefully. She laughed softly. "It shows, huh?" "More than a little." She shrugged. "Well, someone's got to keep things running. My mom's sick, so I help cover her medicine. And my little brother's still in school. So, I deliver food." She said it without bitterness, as though it were simply the way life was. David leaned forward, his voice low. "Doesn't it ever feel unfair?" Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "Of course it does. But what's the point of dwelling on unfairness? Life may be hard, but kindness doesn't cost anything. If I can make someone's day a little better, even in a small way, then I've done something right." The words hit him with unexpected force. For years, David had lived in a world where kindness was currency and generosity always came with strings attached. To hear it spoken so plainly, with such conviction, made his chest tighten. He tried to mask his emotions, but his voice cracked slightly when he said, "You really believe that?" She nodded firmly. "Absolutely. People forget sometimes that it could be them in need tomorrow. So why not help today?" For a long moment, David couldn't look away. There was no performance in her eyes, no calculation. Just a young woman who carried the weight of the world and still chose compassion. He forced himself to smile, though inside he felt something unraveling. "You're unusual." She laughed lightly. "I'll take that as a compliment." When she eventually stood to leave, she adjusted his chair slightly so he could reach the table better. "Take care of yourself, all right? And don't skip meals anymore. Promise?" David nodded slowly, watching her go. As the door closed, he exhaled, his hands gripping the wheels of the chair. For the first time in years, the billionaire felt truly seen. For a long moment, Amara just stood frozen at the doorway. Her mind struggled to connect the two images: the frail man in the wheelchair, living in a crumbling apartment, and the commanding figure in a luxury suit before her now. "This can't be," she whispered, clutching the strap of the delivery bag so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Please," David said gently, stepping aside. "Come in. I owe you an explanation." Her legs felt heavy as she entered the suite, her eyes darting around the lavish space: polished marble floors, golden chandeliers, and a panoramic city view glowing with lights. The contrast to the dingy apartment made her head spin. David closed the door behind her and walked toward the table. "Everything you saw before, the wheelchair, the apartment, the struggles, it was all an act. I wanted to test something. To test you." Amara's brow furrowed in disbelief. "An act? You mean, you lied? About everything?" David's chest tightened at the pain in her voice. "Yes. I pretended to be poor, crippled, and struggling because I wanted to see if kindness still existed. Real kindness, not the kind people show when they know there's something to gain. I've been surrounded by people who only cared about my wealth, my power, what I could give them. I needed to know if someone could care without all that." Her heart raced. "So I was just part of your little experiment?" He stepped closer, his voice soft but firm. "At first, yes. But it didn't stay that way. He paused, searching for the right words. "You shocked me. You gave me food when I couldn't pay. You shared your own dinner. You even left money behind without saying a word, knowing you might go hungry because of it. Amara, no one has ever done that for me. Not without expecting something in return." Tears stung the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I helped because I thought you needed it. Not because I wanted to prove anything. And that," David said earnestly, "is exactly why it means so much. You didn't do it for recognition. You didn't even tell me about the money. You showed me that genuine kindness still exists in this world, in you." Amara looked down, her emotions warring within her. Part of her felt betrayed by the deception, But another part remembered every moment. His awkward gratitude, his loneliness, the way he had looked at her as though she mattered. "Do you know how humiliating this feels?" she asked quietly. "To think I was helping someone in need only to find out it was a game to you?" David's voice broke. "It wasn't a game, Amara. It was a test, and you changed me. I see now that the riches I've built mean nothing without people like you in my life. Please, don't walk away thinking you were a fool. If anything, you've shown me what real strength and compassion look like." The room fell silent. Amara's chest rose and fell as she tried to steady herself. For the first time in years, David, the billionaire who had everything, waited with bated breath for someone else's judgment. Amara stood in silence, the weight of David's confession pressing heavily against her chest. She could hear the faint hum of the city outside, cars passing, horns in the distance. A reminder that the world was moving on as though nothing had changed. But for her, everything had. She turned to face him, her voice quiet but steady. "Do you know what it feels like to struggle every day, Mr. David? To wake up and wonder if you'll have enough for medicine, enough for rent, enough for food? And yet, in the middle of all that, you think if I can help someone else, maybe it will make things better, even just a little. That's all I had. My kindness. And you turned it into a test." David's jaw tightened. The truth of her words cut him more deeply than any boardroom betrayal ever had. He took a step closer, his tone sincere. "You're right. I lied and I hurt you. But please believe me when I say this. You showed me something I had lost faith in. You reminded me what humanity really looks like. And I swear I will never forget it." Her hands trembled as she set the delivery bag on the table. "So what now? You reveal the big truth and I'm supposed to what? Be grateful?" "No," David said firmly, shaking his head. "Not grateful. I only hope that you can forgive me. Not today, maybe not tomorrow. But someday." Amara looked at him then, really looked at him. Not the billionaire in a tailored suit, but the man who had sat alone in a dim apartment, fumbling clumsily with utensils, thanking her like each small act meant the world. Even if it had been a disguise, some part of that man was real. Her breath trembled as she exhaled. "You broke my trust. But," she hesitated, her voice softening. "You're also the first person in a long time who looked at me and actually listened. Who saw more than just the delivery uniform. And that counts for something." David's eyes softened, hope flickering in them. "Then maybe, this isn't the end?" Amara gave a faint, weary smile. "I don't know what it is yet. But it doesn't have to be the end." Silence lingered between them, not heavy with anger but charged with the fragile possibility of something new. David nodded slowly, almost reverently. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but earnest. "Not just for forgiving me, for being you." Amara picked up her empty delivery bag and slung it over her shoulder. She paused at the door, glancing back at him. "If you really mean what you said, then prove it. Not with money, not with grand gestures. Prove it by being better." And with that, she stepped out into the night, leaving David standing alone in the golden glow of the hotel suite. Yet for the first time in years he didn't feel empty. He felt humbled, challenged, and deeply changed. Weeks passed after that night at the Grand Imperial. Amara returned to her routine, the long shifts, the endless deliveries, the tired evenings spent caring for her mother and helping her younger brother with homework. Life went on, yet somewhere deep inside, the memory of that revelation lingered. She told herself to forget him. He was a billionaire living in another world, one she didn't belong to. But sometimes, when she carried food up narrow staircases or counted the last of her coins to cover bus fare, she remembered the sincerity in his eyes when he had said, "You reminded me what humanity looks like." Meanwhile, David was not the same man he had been. The test that began as a curiosity had reshaped him completely. The wealth that once insulated him now felt like a responsibility. He had seen, through Amara, the quiet struggles ordinary people carried without complaint. And he had vowed to do something about it. He started small. Instead of lavish galas, he funded food drives across the city, anonymous donations at first, then more public initiatives. He upgraded the restaurant Amara worked for, paying to expand their kitchen and raise wages, though he made sure she didn't know it was from him. For the first time in years, his money felt purposeful. One cool Saturday morning, as Amara stepped out of her apartment building carrying her delivery bag, she stopped short. Parked across the street was a sleek black car, and standing beside it was David, not in a sharp suit this time but in a simple shirt and slacks. No pretense, no disguise, no armor of wealth. Just him. Her heart skipped. "You again?" she said, her voice caught between irritation and something softer. He smiled nervously. "I know I don't deserve your time. But I wanted to show you I meant what I said. I'm trying to be better. She folded her arms, studying him carefully. And how do you plan to prove that? David gestured toward the car. Come with me. Just for today. No tricks, no lies. Let me show you something. Amara hesitated, then sighed. Against her better judgment, curiosity won. Fine. One day. They drove through the city until they reached a newly opened community center bustling with children, families, and volunteers. Amara's eyes widened as she took it in, free meals being served, doctors offering checkups, shelves stacked with school supplies. All of this, David said quietly, is because of you. You inspired it. Your kindness lit a fire in me I thought was long dead. For a moment, Amara was speechless. The sincerity in his voice, the sight before her, it was proof more powerful than any words. Finally, she turned to him, her lips curving into a small but genuine smile. Maybe you're not such a lost cause after all. David chuckled softly, relief flooding his features. For the first time, the distance between Billionaire and Delivery Girl didn't feel insurmountable. It felt like the start of something neither of them had expected. Not an experiment, not a test, but a real connection built on truth. And as the children's laughter echoed around them, both knew this was only the beginning.